There is one room on Earth where 5 countries can legally stop the entire world from acting, no matter how many other nations disagree. That room is the United Nations Security Council chamber in New York, and understanding what happens inside it explains some of the biggest failures and achievements in modern global history. Let's start from the beginning. The United Nations Security Council was created in 1945 after World War II, with a single primary mission: to maintain international peace and security. The world had just lived through the deadliest conflict in human history, and the founding nations wanted a body powerful enough to prevent it from ever happening again. The Council held its very first session on January 17, 1946, and it has been meeting ever since. Today, the Security Council has 15 members. 5 of those members are permanent: China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. These 5 nations, known as the P5, were the major allied powers that emerged from World War II. The remaining 10 seats are non-permanent members, elected by the broader United Nations General Assembly for staggered 2-year terms, based on equitable geographical distribution. The African Group holds 3 of those elected seats, the Asia-Pacific Group 2, the Eastern European Group 1, and the Latin American and Caribbean Group, along with the Western European and Others Group, each hold 2. Now here is what makes the Security Council unlike any other body on the planet. It is the only United Nations organ with the authority to issue resolutions that are legally binding on all 193 member states. The General Assembly can debate, recommend, and pass resolutions, but those are non-binding. When the Security Council acts under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, every country in the world is legally obligated to comply. Its powers include establishing peacekeeping operations, imposing international sanctions, and authorizing military action. According to the UN Charter, the Council can identify threats to international peace, determine breaches of peace, and authorize responses up to and including the use of force. So how does the Council actually make a decision? For a resolution to pass on a substantive matter, it needs an affirmative vote from at least 9 of the 15 members, and here is the critical part. That must include the concurring votes of all 5 permanent members. If even 1 permanent member votes no, the resolution is dead. That is the veto. The word veto actually does not appear anywhere in the UN Charter. The power comes from Article 27, which simply states that decisions on substantive matters require the concurring votes of the permanent members. But in practice, the effect is identical. Any single P5 nation can block any binding action on any issue at any time.
According to records maintained by the United Nations Dag Hammarskjöld Library, the veto has been recorded nearly 300 times since February 16, 1946, when the Soviet Union cast the very first one on a draft resolution regarding the withdrawal of foreign troops from Lebanon and Syria. Over the decades, the Soviet Union, and later Russia, has cast the most vetoes in history, more than 120 in total, which accounts for close to half of all vetoes ever cast. The United States has cast 82 vetoes, and since 1970 has been the most frequent user, most often on resolutions the U.S. regarded as detrimental to the interests of Israel. The United Kingdom has used the veto 29 times, France 16 times, and China 16 times, though China's use has become increasingly active, with 13 of its 16 vetoes coming after 1997. The veto has not been used evenly across time. During the Cold War, the Council was largely paralyzed by rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. After 1990, there was a brief period of coordination. The Council authorized the coalition response to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, and peacekeeping missions expanded significantly. But veto politics reasserted themselves, particularly after 2011, when the conflict in Syria began. Russia and China used the veto repeatedly on Syria. 14 of Russia's post-2011 vetoes were Syria-related, and 8 of China's 9 vetoes in that same period were also over Syria. The experience of Libya in 2011, where a Security Council resolution authorizing a no-fly zone was later argued to have been exceeded by the NATO-led intervention, shaped how those 2 countries approach Syria and subsequent crises. More recently, the pace of vetoes has accelerated. In 2024, permanent members cast 8 vetoes on 7 draft resolutions, the highest number since 1986, according to one analysis. Between 2023 and 2024, the United States cast 5 vetoes related to the war in Gaza. In 2025, 4 more vetoes were cast, 2 by the United States on Gaza and 2 by Russia on Ukraine, and the Council adopted just 44 resolutions in 2025, the lowest number since 1991, according to reports tracking Council output. Deep divisions reportedly prevented meaningful responses to conflicts in Gaza, Myanmar, Sudan, and Ukraine. Now here is the part that many people find most striking. Not only does the veto block action, but it is entirely lawful under the Charter when it does so. According to legal analysts, the veto is granted as an unconditional negative power, with no explicit requirement that it be used consistently with the purposes of the United Nations. Critics argue that this means the Council's response to threats to peace is frequently determined by geopolitical alignment rather than objective legal assessment.
Supporters counter that the Council, for all its limitations, provides a framework within which the great powers can negotiate, and that the veto reflects the reality that enforcement action cannot succeed without the cooperation of the most powerful states. So what happens when the Council is blocked? Since 2022, there has been one new mechanism designed to add accountability. Under what is widely known as the Veto Initiative, formerly General Assembly Resolution 76/262. Whenever a permanent member casts a veto, the full 193-member General Assembly must convene within 10 days to debate the issue. According to the United Nations, since that resolution was adopted, 17 vetoes have triggered 17 of these General Assembly meetings. Supporters say this adds transparency and gives non-member nations a voice. Critics point out that General Assembly resolutions are non-binding and that those meetings have had little tangible impact on the ground. The question of who actually controls the Security Council goes beyond just the veto. The Council's presidency rotates monthly among all 15 members in English alphabetical order, giving each country the power to shape the agenda during their month. However, the 5 permanent members wield far more structural influence. They hold permanent seats, meaning they never have to campaign for re-election. They dominate the role of what insiders call the pen holder, the country that drafts a resolution and controls its language before it ever comes to a vote. Permanent members use the veto and the threat of the veto to shape negotiations long before any formal vote occurs. Countries often know a resolution will be vetoed and choose not to bring it forward at all. There is also the question of who is missing from the table. Since its founding, the United Nations has grown from 51 member states to 193. The global population has grown from 2.5 billion people to 8 billion. Yet the Security Council's permanent membership has not changed since 1945. The only structural reform came in 1965, when the number of non-permanent members was increased from 6 to 10. Africa, home to over 1 billion people and the subject of roughly 70% of the Council's agenda items according to reports, has 0 permanent representation. Latin America has none. The entire Asia-Pacific region, home to more than half the world's population, is represented permanently only by China. This is the engine driving one of the most sustained reform debates in international relations. According to the African Union's position, known as the Ezului Consensus, Africa demands no fewer than 2 permanent seats with veto power and 5 additional non-permanent seats. A group of 4 major economies, Brazil, Germany, India, and Japan, collectively known as the G4, have intensified their push for permanent Security Council seats, arguing that the current composition fails to reflect contemporary global realities. A competing bloc, known as Uniting for Consensus and led by Italy, opposes new permanent seats and instead advocates for expanded rotating seats and stronger accountability measures. The central obstacle to all reform proposals is the same mechanism that defines the Council's power, the veto itself. According to the UN Charter, any amendment requires ratification by 2/3 of all member states, including all 5 permanent members. In other words, reforming the veto requires the consent of the very countries that hold it. Analysts describe this as a structural deadlock. Charter amendment requires P5 consent, making self-reform essentially a precondition for change. What comes next? Reform discussions have been formalized through what is known as the Intergovernmental Negotiations process, and the 2024 Pact for the Future, agreed by world leaders at the UN Summit of the Future, explicitly called for greater representation in the Security Council for underrepresented regions. The UN's own Secretary General has publicly called for expanded membership to better reflect the world's demographics and has encouraged discussions on proposals to limit the use of the veto. The UN 80 initiative, launched in 2025 to mark the organization's 80th anniversary, has brought renewed urgency to the conversation. Diplomats acknowledge that broad agreement exists on the need for reform, but that translating agreement into charter amendments remains, as of now, a formidable challenge. The UN Security Council remains, for all its tensions, the only body on Earth with the legal authority to authorize binding collective action across borders. Whether it can evolve to reflect the realities of the 21st century, or whether its structure continues to reflect the world of 1945, is the defining question of multilateral diplomacy right now. If you want to stay informed on stories like this, the systems shaping our world explained clearly, follow this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.